DJI just released the Osmo Action 4. With the Action 4 coming in at $399 in the US and €429 here in Germany, the Action 3 is already between 20 to 30% cheaper at $329 or €335, and we can expect the price of the Action 3 to fall further. So I decided to do a quick review on the Action 3 to see if it's a good alternative for you if you are in the market for a new action camera today. Personally, I picked up my Action 3 back in May, even though rumors surrounding the Action 4 were already slowly making waves. I was looking for a reliable and small camera with a good image, and with a project on the horizon, I decided that the Action 3 seemed to fit all my needs. The most important criteria for me were 10-bit color and a sharp 4K image. Back in May, the only options meeting these criteria were the GoPro Hero 11 and the Action 3. After watching quite a few reviews on both cameras, I decided to pick up the Action 3, mainly because I heard some reports about the GoPro being unreliable at times and not recording without fail, while there were no such reports for the Action 3. Once I received the camera, I decided to give it a proper test run, and so I took it on a 1-week motorcycle tour to put it through its paces. Let's start with the things I liked about the Action 3, from highest priority to lowest priority. First of all, I liked the image. Of course, we need to be realistic. It won't produce images that are as good as a cinema camera. That is mostly because of the small lenses and sensors that action cameras use to stay compact, but also due to the relatively limited codec options with relatively low bit rates. With the reality check out of the way, the image coming from the Action 3 is sharp and detailed for it is, and it is robust enough to take some color grading when necessary. The dynamic range is also pretty good. I always recorded in Pro mode with the D-Cine-like colors and the enhanced image quality setting turned off. The latter because the 10-bit color cannot be combined with this setting, and I'd rather have the 10-bit color. The Action 4 offers D-Log-M, which is a flatter, more professional profile than D-Cine-like. This, combined with the bigger sensor, gives you better dynamic range. If this is important to you, the Action 4 is definitely worth a look. Getting back to the Action 3, I really enjoyed the way that the camera immediately starts recording when you press the record button while it's powered off. It only takes a second or so and you're rolling. When you press the button again, the camera stops recording and powers down after roughly 3 seconds to preserve battery life. This is an amazing quality of life feature, and during my vacation with it, I can confidently say that due to this feature alone, I got at least 3 shots that I would otherwise have missed. Next, let's quickly talk about the touchscreens that the Action 3 and Action 4 share. Given the way action cameras are mounted sometimes, it definitely happens that you cannot reach the rear screen to adjust your settings, for example when mounted close to a wall. Most action cameras offer an app to change the settings, but honestly, I don't want to deal with connecting to the right Wi-Fi and drag out my phone just to verify that my settings are right and make adjustments if necessary. That's where the Action 3 and the Action 4 have a clear edge over the competition from GoPro, in my opinion. You can access every single feature of the camera right from the front screen. Using it is honestly a breeze, and I wouldn't want to miss it again. Let's also talk about the stabilization for a minute. I tried all the settings: Rocksteady, Rocksteady Plus, and Horizon Steady. For me, Rocksteady is all I could personally ever need in terms of stabilization, and it works very well. I also really like Horizon Steady as a concept. However, on the Action 3 it cuts into the resolution too much and leads to a visibly soft image in my experience. Interestingly, according to DJI's own website, the Action 4 shoots video with a maximum resolution of 3840 by 2880 pixels and 10 megapixels in stills mode, while the Action 3 turns out to have a higher resolution with 4096 pixels by 3072 pixels in video mode and 12 megapixels in stills mode. Both cameras seem to otherwise support the same frame rates and resolutions. Unfortunately, I don't have an Action 4 on hand to test whether the image is sharper at the higher frame rates or when using Horizon Steady, but assuming that the crop for each stabilization mode is similar and the resolution is indeed lower, I would not expect to get a sharper image under otherwise equal circumstances. In general, it's important to keep in mind that as with any digital stabilization, you will want to increase your shutter speed to at least 4 times your frame rate, or more, as otherwise the motion blur will show up as unnatural distortion in your image when the digital stabilization does its job. Honestly, when using stabilization on the Action 3 or 4, I would basically always set the camera to auto exposure and at most change the exposure compensation or the allowed ISO range. By the way, this also means that you pretty much don't need to bother with ND filters on these cameras, in my opinion, as maintaining a 180-degree shutter angle is hopeless anyway, and so you might as well just increase it for the correct exposure. The downside of all of this is that you get a pretty video-y look when using digital stabilization in general. Regarding battery life, I really enjoyed the battery on the Action 3, and as the Action 4 is using the same battery, I expect it to be similar. It held up well on our tours and was almost never the limiting factor. That was in fact the data that I was comfortable dealing with. And if you really need to use the camera for longer than the battery allows, you can always power it using USB-C power delivery indefinitely. Finally, DJI's user interface is probably one of the best I used in a camera of any kind. It is only rivaled by Blackmagic in my opinion, and very simple and intuitive to use, especially considering the size of the screen, and even more so considering that it works exactly the same way on the tiny front screen without becoming unusable. Now, onto the things I didn't love. First of all, the Action 3 has a fixed focus lens. This means that it does not adjust its focus based on the scene it's recording, but it always focuses on the same plane. Given that the sensor is quite small and it doesn't have the aperture to compensate for it, the depth of field is very small. Basically, everything is in focus anyway. However, for some reason, DJI chose to set the focus on the Action 3 very far away. My copy is only in focus from around 40 centimeters distance. It's fine when used as an actual action camera, and getting macro shots from it simply isn't the purpose of this camera. Nevertheless, I would have preferred it if the lens would have been tuned to focus a little closer. With the focus set like this, the Action 3 disqualifies itself for applications such as vlogging and many other, quotation marks, regular video applications. I am also not a huge fan of the way that DJI treats the resolution of the various video modes. Consider this. When you take a photo on the Action 3, it comes out with a resolution of 4000 by 3000 pixels. It also offers an open gate recording mode of 4096 by 3072 pixels. So let's assume for the sake of the argument that that's the native resolution of the sensor. The lens is obviously built to cover the whole sensor. So when using the ultra-wide field of view without any stabilization, that's the real resolution you're getting without any crop. However, once you turn on the stabilization or you change your field of view settings, the Action 3 crops in significantly. So much in fact that I'm almost certain that it falls below the 4K UHD resolution. The final image still comes out with the resolution you set in the camera, leading me to believe that DJI is simply upscaling the image to match the resolution setting. For example, let's look at a native 4K image from the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K on the left, and the Action 3 in ultra-wide without stabilization on the right. Just look out for the sharpness of the image and nothing else. It looks relatively similar, right? Okay, now look at the same image, but with the Action 3 set to horizon steady and standard D-warp. It is clearly softer here, despite still being recorded in the same 4K UHD resolution. Personally, I would prefer it if DJI simply told us what resolution we're actually recording in, and would give us, let's say, a full HD file after cropping in this much. There's really no need to talk a lot about the low-light performance of a camera with a sensor this small and without a lens to compensate for it. So let's just say that the Action 3 is not a low-light camera, and you shouldn't honestly expect it to be one either. However, DJI says that the Action 4's low-light capabilities are significantly improved thanks to the bigger sensor while maintaining the f2.8 aperture of the lens and improved noise reduction. So if low-light is important to you, you'll probably want to jump to the Action 4. Then, let's talk about the microphones. The first 2 days of recording with this camera, I ended up with no usable audio at all. On day 1, I had the software wind filter turned off because I didn't realize it existed. On the second day, I had it turned on, but the sound was still completely unusable. It was only when I repositioned the camera on my motorcycle to be a little more protected from the airstream that I got somewhat usable audio. And even so, I was hoping for more. I don't know if I'm being unrealistic or not, but I used a GoPro Hero 3 years ago, and if my memory serves me right, the audio in the protective case was a lot more clean back then. Anyway, when there's no wind, like now, the audio is impressively good for such a small camera, and from the tests I saw of the Action 4, it sounds very comparable to what you are hearing right now. Now to the two things that really bothered me about the Action 3. First, I almost immediately lost the USB-C cover while riding on my motorcycle with a USB-C cable plugged in to provide it with continuous power. I wasn't aware that the door is on a little removable hinge, and despite there being nothing that would interfere with it, it seemingly vibrated off within at most 5 minutes of riding. Without the cover, the camera is obviously no longer waterproof, so I tried to get a replacement from DJI on short notice. The DJI support wasn't immediately able to tell me if they could give me a replacement at all. There was no way to get a hold of one while I was on vacation, so the rest of the time I had to use the camera in good weather conditions only and remove it in panic when it started raining. So long story short, if you want to provide the camera with power while in use, and if it moves like at all, you want to remove the cover completely or it's practically gone. And that also does apply to the Action 4. Finally, I find it pretty incredible that one has to register in the DJI app and pair the camera to an account to use it, like physically use it. The camera lets you power it on for 5 times and then forces you to pair it to the app or it will simply refuse to operate like whatsoever. Honestly, this was pretty much a deal breaker for me, but given that I like the camera a lot otherwise, I installed the app, registered with a one-time email address, paired the camera and then deleted the app again. At least you get to use the camera without it bugging you anymore once it's registered. When it comes to mounting this camera, or action cameras in general, DJI offers a magnetic mount for this camera that is quite innovative, and I actually do like it. However, I chose to not use it for 2 reasons. Firstly, when used on the camera directly, there is a little bit of play, and I'm concerned about this leading to vibrations that make it into the image. Secondly, I never had much love for the typical action camera screw-on mounts. I find them a bit clunky and too flimsy to use, at least in my personal experience. Since I mount almost all of my camera gear with 1/4-inch screws, I chose to order a small rig cage for the Action 3 and a magic arm with a super clamp to mount the camera to whatever I need to mount it to. The small rig cage is very well made, and while it adds weight to the camera, it provides access to all ports, and I'm confident that it also adds a lot of protection to it. More importantly though, it provides 4 1/4-inch mounting points with RE locating pins. This means that the camera can be mounted in every orientation, and with the correct mounting hardware, it also cannot rotate or come loose. I'm not sure if this specific small rig cage is gonna fit the Action 4, but if you're picking up the Action 4, make sure to check once small rig releases the cage for the Action 4, and I would highly recommend it. All of this surely isn't the cheapest solution for mounting your action camera, but it probably is one of the best. And in the end, if your camera comes loose and flies off, then that's a far greater loss than the money spent on proper mounting hardware. So in conclusion, should you get the Action 3 or upgrade to the Action 4 straight away? I think if you don't shoot in low light or in very high dynamic range scenarios, the Action 3 is still a great pick, and you can probably safely save the money. If these things are important to you, however, the jump to the Action 4 may be worth it for you. Personally, for what it's worth, I will be sticking with the Action 3 for the foreseeable future, as I have other cameras that are much better suited for complicated shooting conditions when the need arises. Thank you so much for visiting my channel. If you found this video helpful, consider leaving a like below, and if you want to see more videos like this one, I invite you to subscribe to my channel. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you in the next one.